Hey everyone, Carl here, and actual plays are super popular right now. Most of them are D&D though. What about Savage Worlds? Well, I had a chance to sit down with a couple of actual play podcasts and learn what they're doing, their community, and why did they use Savage Worlds. It's a savage world, strange as a weird war. It's a savage world, classics to Hey everybody, this is Carl again with Tabletop Tango. I'm super happy you're here. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as you can see, I've got some people with me today, and I'm really psyched, happy, because we're going to talk about actual plays for Savage Worlds. And I have someone from the Savage Eberron podcast, Ellie. We've got James, Mike, and Nick from the Legends of the Ramble House Saints, but that's kind of the actual one. That's all a big one. They'll tell you more about it. So let's get into it. Let's learn about everybody, introduce themselves. So let's start with Ellie. Introduce yourself. Tell me a little bit about the actual play, kind of what the campaign, the concept, and what your role is.
Yeah, so I'm Ellie. I'm a player in a podcast called Savage Tales of Eberron. Our table has been together for almost a year and a half now. And my role is, besides playing, is sort of as chronicling the campaign and handling most of the social media in terms of engagement on Twitter, on Discord. And back since before we started a podcast, I've been maintaining a website by the same name, Savage Tales of Eberron, in which I do long-form narrative recaps of each session for people who might prefer that or have a harder time catching up with audio, and also do some mechanics articles as well. And now our GM, Philip, has gotten on board with that, adding his voice to those mechanics articles, which is awesome. But yeah, I handle a lot of the, I guess you'd say, social interactions.
Okay, so
as well as maintaining the site.
Yeah. Great. So you're going to give us that, community media perspective. That's awesome. So then let's jump to James. Tell me about the actual play again, the campaign, the concept, what your role is.
Absolutely. I'm James. I am the primary game master for Knights of the Smith Dinner Table. Currently, we are running the Giant Slayer Adventure Path from Pathfinder under the Pathfinder for Savage Worlds rule set. Pretty much, we kind of stole the idea from the Glass Cannon and are doing almost the same thing, but just in Savage Pathfinder rather than straight Pathfinder. I also handle pretty much all the social media, as well as trying to get a website set up. Ellie, I may talk to you later.
Look, we're already building a community. Look at us go. So let's jump to Mike. Tell me. I know you're on the same podcast as James, but tell me what your role is and what you do there.
Currently, I'm just a player. I've ran games for the Knights of the Smith Dinner Table. We'll do so again. The reason we jumped into Savage Worlds for Pathfinder, or Pathfinder for Savage Worlds, however they want to say it, really because once Savage Worlds got that license, the lore that Paizo has built into their world, there's so much to dig into, but having a more pulpy is the way I like to describe Savage Worlds compared to other RPs. Having a more pulpy setting really helps just get everything across. I feel like we can do more with it.
Very cool. And then we'll definitely not least but last, we'll talk. Nick, tell us about you.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm currently also just a player right now for the Knights of the Smith Dinner Table. I actually play in several other campaigns, but we're only currently broadcasting one of them. But I really like the setting so far just because it's something different. Like, I've played other systems before. This one just seems down to like an essence. The best way to describe it is it's simple, but it's complicated, if that makes sense. There's so much you can do with it, but it's really easy to try to figure out and do what you want.
See, you're already getting into that. Why Savage Worlds is just awesome for what for doing everything. I love it. Yeah, it's got a lot of really good attributes to it. And then so it sounds like Pathfinder, the Savage Worlds Pathfinder, really sort of kicked off, at least for some of you, that this is a system that I can use and leverage the lore and take advantage of it. So. Before we really dive deep into Savage Worlds, but tell me a little bit more about the logistics. How do you guys, how do you broadcast? How do you engage with the community? Get your media out there for people to consume. Let's start with Ellie.
All right, so we are audio only, just a podcast for the moment, and we just do very basic recording. Honestly, we actually record all of our stuff in the Zoom call, and then Michael, who's playing Torlin in our current Mourners of Lazar campaign, handles cleaning that up after the fact. He's an absolute rock star, because there are several ways in which Zoom isn't ideal for that sort of thing, because you can't separate the individual tracks very easily. If someone mutes Zoom in-app, that puts them out of sync with the rest of the recording. But right now, it's the best solution for us, and Michael makes it work extraordinarily well, and also handles finding all of the royalty-free music and effects and stuff, which is fantastic. So that's how we go about the recording. And then from week to week, and we do typically have things recorded a week before we actually release them, so that we're not rushing from one day to the next. We just go through that little process. Michael usually gets the audio up for us to download often by the next day. We play and record on Tuesday nights, and it's pretty common he'll have it up on Wednesday. And then between Philip and I, we'll upload that to Podbean. I'll write the copy for the episode description that goes on Spotify and Apple and wherever people listen to their podcasts, which is also something else we've set up for Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and we host through Podbean. So that just goes up wherever people listen.
Very cool.
Yeah. And then there's always an accompanying text recap for every episode. And at the end of those, I usually do a little behind the scenes look at any sort of particular mechanics that helped move the session and complement the story. Last week, we had an epic dramatic task where someone was blown overboard off the ship in a squall, and we had to rescue him out of the water. And so I did a little breakdown of here's how a dramatic task worked, because we do play in Eberron. It's originally and primarily a D&D setting. Mm-hmm. And so, the idea is that we want to appeal to people who play Savage Worlds but don't know much about Eberron, but we also want to appeal to people who love Eberron but don't know much about Savage Worlds. So we like to have everything kind of complement each other, both for the audio and the site. And then, just weekly posts on Twitter, engaging with people on the Eberron Discord server. There's a dedicated channel for talking about what happened in your game this past week or whatever, and we'll hear from people there as well.
Very cool. Very cool. So, James, Nick, Mike, what about your actual play? Same question.
So, typically we meet on Discord. At least right now, we're looking at other options, preferably free, because we've already spent a ton of money on all of our equipment. We use XSplit for recording. Then I go through and clean it up in Vegas Pro, and that allows me to sync the sound up and everything. And I am recording in multiple channels. Then we typically do at least 2 episodes that we record at a time, so that way we can get a little bit of leeway in case something happens. I mean, I have kids, Nick now has a kid, Mike has kids, and our other 2 players who couldn't be here, Kristen and Dustin, they both live very active lives too, so we try and record as much as we can. And we also try not to give any clue when we recorded them. That way it does stay fresh. We don't talk about a whole lot of current events or anything. We just kind of get right into the game. And we release it on YouTube in the video format. Since we play on Foundry, they get to see the map. Sometimes they get to see me if my equipment's cooperating. But primarily it's just the audio with the Foundry map. Thanks to some pretty amazing mods that are out there. Primarily Iron Monk's screen share is what the actual people see in the video. And I distribute through Red Circle, and we're on Spotify, Google Pods, and I cannot remember the others. We're on like 7 or 8 different pod distributors. Everything but Apple, because I don't own an Apple product. They won't work with PCs yet, and I'm not a fan of Apple. So once they get the PC versions ready, then we'll definitely be on an Apple podcast as well.
All right. Well, both of you.
Certification.
Well, both you guys have a lot of stuff. I'm just on YouTube. That's all.
The Apple certification process was the most hoops for us to jump through in getting Savage Tales of Eberron approved versus Spotify and Amazon. So yeah, I can understand that, but it's such a popular platform. I'm really glad we were able to get up there. I hope you guys manage it.
We will. It may not be until they get the PC friendliness going. I just don't have the cash to drop on Apple products at the moment.
Well, we don't want to date ourselves here, but man, there's some really good stuff that came out. Anyway, so let's talk. I've listened to some episodes. Obviously, I can't. You have so much content, and it's really fantastic. A lot of good stuff. I like how you, as far as the YouTube side, interact with the map and do things like that. But a lot of your distribution is audio only. So from a player standpoint, game master standpoint, are there challenges that come with that? As far as I'm thinking of when I'm listening, how do I recognize a character or that sort of thing?
I'm sure Ellie and her folks can agree with this. We've been trying to be very careful about describing what we're doing, where we're moving to, and it makes it extra challenging because we are looking at Foundry, and so we don't always think about that. I think you guys play on Foundry too, don't you, Ellie?
I do, but I will say that narrating our actions and being really specific about what we're doing, how we look, what is going on. I feel like that's come very naturally for our table. We were playing together for about a year, actually just a little over a year before we decided to start a podcast with the second campaign. So we already had that connection, that vibe going on. I guess the only real big changes we made and that we kind of took us a few sessions into this new campaign to adjust to was ensuring that at the beginning and end of every episode we introduce ourselves and say which character we played, and also calling out our roles. That was something that we talked about, that hey, like we should do this even if we're going to Benny it. Say, okay, I got a 3, I'm gonna Benny that. Or even if you got a success, well, I got a success, but I'm fishing for a raise, so let's go. And that we think kind of helps set the stage a bit better.
I'm stealing that. I will not give you credit just because I'm a horrible person, but
I'll find you on Twitter, don't worry.
I've seen you on Twitter, so It really is a big hurdle because we went from we have a lot of content on our YouTube page from a variety of different games. Savage Pathfinder is just our current and the one that we're kind of pushing to stay in for a bit. We're kind of mercenaries when it comes to games. We'll play just about anything that's out there just to give it a whirl. So when we went from this in-person situation where we were filming the entire table and we'd have the map up and everything like that to going to this digital route, and we were originally just posting to YouTube. So when we decided to move to expand it, that's definitely something that we're still working on, getting those descriptions going. Um, it's just when you're in the mindset of like, okay, we see everything. It's got to remember that there are people out there who don't have YouTube and are watching the map. Those are things that I'm definitely being more cognizant of as we're going, but it's just an adjustment.
So have you folks ever thought about doing more theater of the mind and less, sort of everything happens at the range of plot and, more theater of the mind? Is that something you've tried? And it's just, I mean, Savage Worlds is really very good with, maps and, inches and things like that. But have you thought about that theater of mind side of it and tried it out and seen if it worked? Or
we've done it a little bit in the past. The issue that we've run into is we have some very visually oriented players amongst our various groups, and we have many groups. I think we've got 4 different games running right now.
Oh, excellent.
So, and the Legend of the Ramble House Saints is the only one we are recording, but theater of the mind for our very visually oriented people is just really difficult for them to grasp. And I'll throw my wife right under the bus. She's one of them.
Yeah, I actually personally play theater of the mind in my home games just because I don't have the setup to get out a map and the big table and everything like that these days.
Very cool.
Even though we do Foundry, and Philip is really awesome with putting together maps and backgrounds and stuff, there are times when it just becomes natural for him to use theater of the mind for us instead, like for that dramatic task that I just talked about, or for quick encounters, or for things that aren't just that very specific granular kind of combat. Theater of the mind is something that he'll often shift to, and I think one of the ways in which Savage Tales of Eberron actually has a bit of an advantage for some of these hurdles for things that are kind of hard to adjust to, but for us, I think have come pretty naturally, is that we've never played in person. We all found this game by answering an LFG on the Eberron Discord, and we live all over the place. I'm up in Canada. Most of the guys are down in the U.S. Ernesto, who's playing Truco and Mornis Hulsar, is in Uruguay. So we've never had the opportunity to play in person. So the added things you have to think about that come from playing, the other things you have to think about in terms of playing online and having less visual cues to work off of have just been, a normal part of how we've been playing for the past year and a half.
Very cool. Very cool. Oh, all the way in Uruguay. That's awesome. That's pretty cool.
That's amazing.
That is awesome.
That is awesome.
That is the internet right there.
Awesome. Yeah, he's usually 3 hours ahead of myself and Philip. We're both on Mountain Time. So he's already staying up real late to play with us, and of course now we've all transitioned to daylight savings time, which they don't use in Uruguay.
Oh, okay.
So he's up to like 1 a.m. on Tuesdays to stay in the game.
Dedication. Gotta love the dedication.
Really
so before
I wouldn't have it any other way.
Awesome. Before I jump, I'm really itching to get into the Savage World side of it, but I'm fascinated with the conversation. Tell me about your community. How big is your, if you know, right? I mean, obviously sometimes you don't, but how big is your community? How many regular viewers do you have? And Ellie's talked a lot about how you engage with your fan base, but I don't know how James, Nick, Mike, how you engage with yours. But how big of a community do you have right now?
I couldn't tell you, because we're spread across so many platforms for podcasting. I couldn't tell you how many we've got there. But YouTube, we've got about 320 viewers. They watch it pretty regularly. A lot of it ends up being downloaded, so it doesn't count as the views that you can see. But interacting with them, we've got our Facebook page, and we actually get quite a bit of interaction through that, and I end up with a lot of Facebook messages, which the one that I think most entertains me was when we first announced that we were going to do Giant Slayer. And this guy contacted us. Mike remembers him. And he could not grasp the whole concept that we were not playing Pathfinder. And he was wanting to give us tips for how to do it. And I'm like, no, we're playing Savage Worlds in the Pathfinder setting. And it was,
but is that 2E or a 1E? No, you don't understand.
Exactly. And we could not get this guy to understand that wasn't what we were playing. And then he watches the first episode and he messaged me again. He's like, "You guys aren't playing first edition?"
I don't get all these different dice. What are you doing?
But for the most part, our fans, we don't directly interact with them unless they message us or they post something on our page or respond to something on our page. But we do seem to have some pretty solid followers, and I'll get hit up in Discord, primarily because I also work for Arkham Forge Tabletop, and so a lot of them will find me there because they know that that's what we use to build the maps. So they'll find me there, and I'll talk to them through Discord quite a bit. So the Discord interaction's where it's biggest for us. And since I'm the face, I take the brunt of it.
Very cool.
And thank God we haven't gotten any fanboys yet. I experienced that working for Arkham Forge. I'm okay not having fanboys.
I experienced your fanboys at Gen Con this year, so that was,
same.
As far as other social media, we're starting to get more on Twitter. The game's on hiatus right now, just because a lot of holidays, a lot of families, things popping up here and there. So once we get back to it, there's going to be a larger push on Twitter, because it seems like, as far as the community for RPGs, Twitter is where people are talking. And so getting that moving more is something that's the goal for next year.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, there's a lot of traffic on Twitter for sure. I could use more followers. Hey, everybody watching. Anyway.
Twitter's been a new experience for us. None of us were really using Twitter before we began the podcast. The bulk of our engagement had been on Discord, on the official, unofficial Eberron server, dialed into that community. And, I'd built up relationships there over the past year of our previous campaign, which was a modified version of Seekers of the Ashen Crown, which was one of the first adventure modules published for Eberron back in 4th edition. And, I'd been chronicling the exploits of our game there. People were engaged with it. People were interested in it. And as part, being dialed into that community, it was actually Christian Serrano, who may be familiar, some of you, from his contributions to the Savage Worlds community. He's also pretty well known in the Eberron community. He used to host a very popular podcast called Manifest Zone, and he's been a champion of using Savage Worlds to play Eberron for long before I came on the scene. And he was actually working for Pinnacle at this time, and he reached out to me on Discord and said, "Hey, I think there's a niche to fill with your content. What would you say about starting a blog to make it more accessible?" And of course, my answer was, "Christian, no one's going to read that." I just like, no one's going to. What are you talking about? No one's going to read my stuff. But he was gently very insistent. And again, I'd been building up these relationships over the course of the year, and I figured I got nothing to lose. I already had everything saved in Google Docs to launch onto the site anyways, so boom, let's go. And it took off really well. so we still don't get a ton of engagement with things like comments on the blog or replies on Twitter or things like that. But as far as numbers go, I mean, I have access to all those numbers because we host the show on Podbean. We're able to see a little aggregator of how our downloads and listens are distributed across various platforms and how many are happening. And we're currently averaging about 50 downloads per episode over the course of that first week, which I think is super awesome for New Kids on the Block. We've only released 8 episodes, and we typically see 3 to 4 times that much traffic on the site in any given week. So the interesting thing, and this might come into play later, is that a lot of the traffic that drives the site during the week isn't from campaign-related content. It's from Savage Worlds-related content with things like those mechanic articles I was talking about.
Excellent, cool. That's well, then that'll bring them into listening to the actual play, probably the podcasts. That's you get them on that drug, and then it's inevitable they'll go try something else, right? Very cool. So a lot of great content. Sounds like you guys have a great community. Really interesting ideas. So now, selfishly, the reason I wanted to talk to you is let's talk about Savage Worlds. What does Savage Worlds bring to the table? Why would you use that system? So let's start with why are you using Savage Worlds? I hear, well, we're mercenaries, we use whatever, but what does Savage Worlds bring? What does it bring to the table as far as the system goes, efficiency, or it's the subsystems or whatever, and then we can talk about what it doesn't bring too. But who wants to jump in? I keep pointing at people. How about somebody just jump in and say, here's why I think Savage Worlds is a great idea?
I can hop right in.
No, fight you for it. Yeah, go for it.
So, for me, using it for Pathfinder, it fills the niche of, if you've ever read any of the Pathfinder novels, or if you read the adventure paths, they all have a very pulp fantasy feel to them. But if you play, and this is nothing against the guys at Paizo, because they created an amazing game, they've created an amazing world, but the Pathfinder First Edition and even the Pathfinder Second Edition rules just do not, to me, grasp that pulpy nature. So that was one of the reasons why when they announced that they were bringing out Savage Pathfinder, I was all for it. I'm like, let's hop on this. Let's see if we can get that same pulpy feel that like the novels and the background from the adventure paths puts in. And there's one that I really want to try. It's from the Second Darkness adventure path. There's an encounter in the second book where you're in a tower that's rolling down a hill and you're having a running fight. And it just, when we played it years ago, it just felt so super clunky under the Pathfinder rules, or Mathfinder as we all call it, that I want to try it so bad in the Savage Worlds setting, or Savage Worlds rule set, just to see if it flows as smoothly as I suspect it will, and give it that pulp fill of like Indiana Jones running away from the boulder type of feel that I feel that Savage Worlds does bring to the table. Very cool. Yeah, and that could be, you could play it straight, or that could be a dramatic task, or, you could do it a lot of different ways. Cool. So, what are your thoughts, Ellie? I know you didn't get a chance. You didn't pick the system necessarily. The system found you through Eberron. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it did find me. So I joined this table in August 2020, and at that time, seeing Philip's LFG post was the first time I'd ever heard of Savage Worlds at all. Used for any setting, any variant of it. but his campaign pitch was very engaging. I got a sense that he, as a GM, actually cared deeply about who his players were, not just for his own sake, but for the table as a whole to work well together and be friends together. And and so yeah, I jumped on that, and that was my introduction to Savage Worlds. That was how I got started. And it's neat, James, that you're talking about how you find it suits the pulp feel of Golarion really well, because kind of the elevator pitch for Eberron always has been it's a world of pulp action and noir intrigue. And well, you've got cinematic combat, you've got everything you can do with bennies, you've got the wide variety of actions everyone can do at any time. You've got it being so much more than just doing an attack or casting a spell, or else you've wasted your turn. You know, you want to swing across the room on a chandelier while shooting someone with your hand crossbow? Yeah, declare multi-action and go for it. And it took me a while as a player coming over from 5th edition to wrap my head around that idea that there was so much more I could do. And not just that I could do it, but that doing it was baked into the mechanics and the rules of the system. It took some wrapping my head around to really embrace that. But I'm now very much of the opinion that even though Eberron is a D&D setting, it's owned by Wizards of the Coast. It was written for it. It's there. I think Savage Worlds is the way to play Eberron because it leans into everything that the setting narrates and talks about and vibes with so very well. I was actually I was playing in a 5e Eberron one-shot a few weeks ago with an extremely experienced DM. And at one point, I'm still thinking my Savage Worlds mindset because I hadn't played 5e in months at that point, and the last time had just been for a one-shot as well. And at one point, it was narrated that I was sitting, we were all at this fancy party. We were sitting down at the table. The lights went out and I could feel a malevolent presence behind me. So I narrated, okay, I'm going to shove my chair back into whoever's behind me to, knock him down, get the drop on him, whip around and get my sword on him. And even this extremely experienced, very well-respected DM who knows things inside out had to stop and think for a second of how this would shake out within the confines of 5th edition. Whereas I'm just thinking, oh yeah, I know exactly how this would be adjudicated in Savage Worlds. It's no problem. This is just what you do. But in 5th edition, it was unusual. But the irony again to me is that kind of action is what Eberron is all about. And I hope I don't get in too much trouble for saying that.
So Nick, as this player, is there anything that you would add to that? Does that all ring true?
Yeah, a lot of it is like I pretty much agree with everything that's been said. Like, there's a lot you can do with the system. I've played a lot of systems. Granted, I probably started a lot later playing role-playing games than some of the people here. I started about 2004, 2005. So I know pretty late on that.
I started in 2018.
Okay, I don't feel as bad now.
Old timer.
But I played several systems. Like, I originally started off with 3.5, stepped back to 2, played Star Wars Saga Edition, just all these D20-based systems. And when I actually finally met James and started playing with him, like, he introduced me to Deadlands, a system that doesn't use D20s as their base dice. And that just opened a whole new world for me. We played, I can't remember the other Pinnacle game for the moment right now.
It was Hell on Earth and Weird West. The classic ones.
Yeah, the classic ones. But Storm Knights.
Oh,
That's not Pinnacle.
That's not Pinnacle.
Nope. That's Torg Eternity.
Torg Eternity. There we go.
By Ulysses Spiel.
There we go. I'm getting all these confused.
Shane did write most of it.
Yes. So, but finally getting introduced to this other system that, doesn't use D20s primarily for anything. Like, I want to slightly focus on this skill a bit more because, like, right now, current campaign, I am playing Barbarian, but I'm starting to raise my spirit skill a little bit. I'm starting to raise, my charisma a little bit. I'm going to eventually dip into sorcerer a little bit, make kind of like a blood rager. That's something I can do relatively easily in the Savage World system instead of, the standard, okay, well, you have to do this. Okay, do you have these ability scores already maxed out to where you want to be so you can do this multi-class when you get to this point and all that stuff? And it's kind of like, it's still there, but it's not as deep, if that makes sense. Like, it's not like, if you don't have a charisma of 15, sorry, you can't play a sorcerer ever.
Yeah, too bad, so sad for you, right? Okay, cool. We'll round it out with Mike. What do you got? Anything to add? We've already covered a lot, so I don't know if you got a little your own spin on it.
The thing about Savage Worlds that sets it apart from pretty much any modern system that's out right now is if you want to play a high fantasy game, it's built into the system. If you want to play a Weird West gunslinger shooting demons, it's built into the system. If you want to take it to space, it's built into the system. With just the core book, you can play any style of game that you want. So it is one of the most versatile systems out there today, and that's really what appeals to me about it.
When I first started playing, I got the Lux, the little book. I found it at Gen Con. I had heard about it on the Happy Jacks RPG podcast, and I went, oh, I really want to try this out. And I played an entire campaign of, a vampire world versus a modern human world, and they are colliding, and I just used the core book. I literally didn't need a setting. I didn't need anything else. It was all just perfect for this mishmash of modern and ancient all kind of coming together. And so it's really good for that. Some people would complain that it's not great for high fantasy, but it sounds like you haven't had a problem with that. It provides that framework well.
I started playing our Savage Eberron first campaign well before Savage Pathfinder was released. So at that time, now we've incorporated quite a bit of Savage Pathfinder, but for that first campaign, we were running off of core rules, Christian's Savage Eberron conversion document, and a bunch of homebrew.
Yeah, I think Savage Pathfinder makes it more accessible for the high fantasy. It took a bit of work previously, but I regardless of what setting it is, be it high fantasy, Savage Pathfinder, Deadlands, Rifts, or just taking the book and going, you know what? I want a vampire who's a mobster, and I've got all the rules right here for it.
Yep, for sure. Well, that's awesome. So I really appreciate that. But now, let's go the other way, right? There's a ton of actual plays based on D&D, and part of it is it's super popular. But the question is it got something that makes it really good for actual plays? What's Savage Worlds missing? Is there something that it doesn't do well that you wish it would do better? And maybe you've already homebrewed it to make it work better for your campaign. So any thoughts on that? What could be better to enable actual plays?
I feel personally that the system itself just lends itself to actual plays because, like, if you're listening to a Pathfinder actual play, Glass Cannon podcast, don't get me wrong, I love those guys. They are hilarious. I've listened to every episode of the Glass Cannon podcast. And one of the things that kills it for me, though, is when they have to dig into the rules, dig deep, whereas with the Savage Worlds, target number is 4 or target number is parry. And usually it's just it doesn't take a deep dive into the rule system to figure something out. Whereas with Dungeons and Dragons, it's not as bad as Pathfinder First Edition, but some of the rules are still pretty obscure.
Grappling rules.
Grappling, yeah.
Always the grappling rules. Those are always the problem, right?
I mean, it's an athletics check.
Right. Yeah, and I think. Go ahead.
Like, honestly, from where I'm sitting, the big thing Savage Worlds is missing in the world of actual plays, besides more actual plays, and the thing that works against it is just straight up comes down to brand recognition. Savage Worlds. Now I know how awesome it is, but like I said, I had literally never heard of it in my life before August of 2020 when I saw Phil's LFG. So when you're talking about a Savage Worlds actual play versus a D&D actual play, everyone and their uncle has heard of D&D, whether they love it or hate it or indifferent to it or play or don't play. Everyone knows what Dungeons and Dragons is in some capacity. And Savage Worlds is just like, it's what now? What worlds? I mean, ultimately it's missing brand recognition, and there's also within that, if it's missing brand recognition and there are a lot less people playing it, then that kind of feeds into less people potentially being interested in listening to how it's played. I've had a lot of conversations trying to extol the virtues of trying other systems such as Savage Worlds, and a lot of people are comfortable to stay where they are in terms of tabletop, and that's okay. But I wish more people would come to Savage Worlds too.
And that's why we're here. That's why we're getting the word out.
When it comes to actual issues within the system itself, my thing is that it's very easy to overwhelm. A couple of good dice rolls and just from either side of a conflict, and half your party's down or half of the mobs are down, or if you give something an edge a bit too early, like putting frenzy on something up against rank 1 characters, it's going to just absolutely wreck them. So there's a balancing act that you have to do, because there is no built-in CR. There's no built-in this monster's good against this rank, and this monster's good against this rank. And if you go a little bit above or below that, you're going to either make things too easy or too hard. So there's a trial and error on balancing combat that I think a lot of other systems have.
And I did a whole video on challenging encounters for Savage World, and one of the things is you're never going to get balance. No, you can't worry about it because it's not going to happen. And for a home game, the potential of a TPK and everybody running away and evading, getting away, that may not play so well in actual play, right? Because you're trying to keep moving a story forward, right? And if it's not balanced and you just fall flat, right? And then you have to come back to it, and I'm not saying retcon or anything like that, but that must really do affect, right? Your ability to keep telling that story, because ultimately you're telling a story and you're doing it in a way of this shared narrative. But ultimately there's a goal out there, right? It's in a home game, people could spend session after session going shopping because they think it's fun to talk to the shopkeepers. Probably not something that you're looking to do, right?
Yeah,
Mike does that.
I'm going to disagree that the swinginess of Savage Worlds has a negative impact on the storytelling, particularly in the context of an actual play. I think so much of that swinginess comes down to how that massive dice explosion in one direction or the other, or that snake eyes, serves to keep the story rolling. In, I think it was our third or fourth episode, we had we're running off the Skull and Shackles adventure path right now, and we had an encounter down in the bilge of a ship to fight some roans of unusual size. And I had an adventure card to double support bonuses for the round. And this, so first off, it started off with someone getting surprised and taking a lot of wounds. We're not playing with wound cap, to further emphasize the swinginess. And so right off the bat, we were one part of four people in dire trouble. I played this adventure card, and the other guys decided they were gonna use their turn to do support actions, and wound up with this massive dice explosion that led to an instant kill and a absolutely fantastic storytelling moment of my character very angrily and effectively skewering this dire rat, or whatever you want to call it, off of her godfather. So, and we've also had some pretty intense moments of swinging in the other direction with critical failures as well. So for me, though, that swinginess comes down to, yeah, it's an extreme, but the story it tells doesn't have to be an extreme. And it's all about looking how to push that story forward.
Very cool. Well put. Very, very nicely put. So last, I think we talked a lot about, but the last thing I'd like to throw out there is, again, from the perspective of an actual play and what those are trying to accomplish, what would you like to see kind of Savage Worlds do? You know, it's like, oh, well, I think probably in the past, some would say, well, you know, makes a little better fantasy vibe because we're doing a fantasy AP. Well, now we got Pathfinder. What are there thoughts on, you know, where could Savage Worlds as a system or settings or, you know, companions or whatever it is help, you know, make your actual plays better going forward? If there is anything.
I was trying to look something up. Sorry, I was trying to look something up real quick, but when it comes to translating it to gathering an audience for an actual play, I don't think it's the system that is requiring to get the interest. It's the people behind the scenes that are, you know, you've got to push your product. You've got to get people listening. With access to information these days, it's so many people are out there doing this. It's not hard to set up something. To draw in listeners, what Savage Worlds needs to do is promote these people who are promoting them by playing it.
Oh, yeah.
And if there's this mutual support between the company that's producing the game and the people who are playing it, the market share grows. D&D, you're not gonna topple the giant because it has been it. They lost market share for a brief time with 4th edition, and they have the money and the backing from Hasbro to do things that smaller companies like Pinnacle cannot do.
Absolutely.
They can afford to take losses. They can afford to do this just to have their name out there. They can afford to promote these podcasts that, you know, have star power that are out there these days. So us little guys playing the little system, we've got to support each other as well. So this is a great opportunity for that. You're out here, you're spreading the word about us. We're going to spread the word about you. I'm definitely going to be listening to Savage Eberron just to hear it, because now I want to, from hearing her talk about it. Huh?
I'm on episode 3.
I'm slow, but it's less about what the system can do for actual plays and more about people actually playing.
Oh, well put. Well put.
And we don't, not to denigrate Pinnacle. I met Shane back in the 90s. I met Jody a few years back. They do an amazing job, and they do everything that they can to help us. Like, I needed some logos, and Jody pointed me in the right direction. I got the logos pretty quickly. But I would like to see them, like Mike said, kind of support us more. So I think it was 3 or 4 months ago, they did their media roundup, and they brought up Savage Tales of Eberron, or they brought up your group, I believe, Ellie. They brought us up, a couple of others, but I feel like that needs to be a little more common rather than once every few months. I like, even as much as once a month would be a huge boost, because Savage Worlds is bringing in new players as people discover it and discover how great the system is. So if they start spreading us, then those people who pick it up from Pinnacle will share it with their friends. You know, that, hey, this show is great. Listen to this show. Watch this show. But I think that would be the best way to do it. I mean, I'm not asking for free product, but hey, Shane, I'll take free product if you'll give it to us.
Are you guys part of the media network?
Yes.
Good, good.
Yeah, it is interesting. How do you get that word out? Because you know, I've been trying to grow an audience as well, and thank God for things like Savage Worlds on Reddit, the official Savage Worlds Facebook group, the media network feed, and those sorts of things to get it. But that doesn't break that barrier into the D&D world, where there's, you know, when you're on like the tabletop RPG type subreddits and stuff like that, it's all D&D. So how do you break in there? And because I'm already in a community that you've already know, Ellie, like you said, if you're on Savage Worlds Reddit, you already know Savage Worlds exist. It is this, you're not just discovering it. So that is an interesting chicken and egg a little bit there. And if you crack that egg, let me know.
Well, part of the problem that I've seen on Reddit, and I've primarily seen it in the Pathfinder forum, is, as much as I hate to say it, there is a lot of toxicity when somebody has settled on a game, and I've especially seen this in the Pathfinder forum. You go into the Pathfinder forum, not the Pathfinder 2e forum, but if you go into the Pathfinder forum and you mention 2e, it's like an army of downvotes. Like, you just get downvoted into oblivion. I've seen that in the D&D. If you mention any other game, you get downvoted into oblivion. And it's just, like Ellie said earlier, it's people not having an open mind, and that's going to be our biggest fight. Playing one of the smaller groups, one of the smaller games, which at this point, Pinnacle's been around 25 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Publishing games. So they're no longer the little guys on the totem pole. They just haven't breached that top tier yet.
And I was moving. This shows like I waste money at Gen Con, but I buy a lot. I used to buy tons of games at Gen Con, and I was going since '93. And I was moving, and I found this book, like the original Savage Worlds rule book that, you know, that wasn't the classic Deadlands, but the original from like 2004 or something like that. And I was playing, I had this the whole time. I had this for years, and I never even tried it. It's like was sitting on my shelf, and I had to wait till I heard about it on some podcast, and then I got the Lux, and it's like I had it. But anyway, so I try to go through my collection more now and try to find if it's like, oh yeah, I do have that. What was I thinking? So, hey, if you got any last thoughts?
I can't think of anything other than, hey, watch our shows or listen to our shows.
Great segue. So we are obviously going to have links. I probably have put it on the screen a couple times in post. We'll see. We'll have links. We'll have everything you need to access. They're going to listen to each other now. Some really good content. You know, great maps. You mentioned the maps on in yours, James, and really good stuff. So thank you so much for participating. This was new for me because, I do that talking head thing. It's great to have folks get together and see if we can grow the community on the actual play side. And then, obviously selfishly, I want to grow my community as well. Not going to be famous, but, it'd be cool to keep growing that. So I'm Carl with Tabletop Tango. Thank you so much, Ellie, James, Mike, Nick, for participating. Great content, and we will see you later. And maybe you guys will participate with me again on some other topic because you guys were so eloquent. So appreciate it. We'll catch you guys later. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
See you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
It's a savage world, strange as a weird wolf. It's a savage world. Bosses